Tyrell, an 8-year-old boy, always tried to stay strong, even when the world around him seemed unfair. But one afternoon, after a school bus ride takes a shocking turn, Tyrell finds himself stranded at the wrong stop, intentionally left there by a driver with cruel intentions. Lost, terrified, and far from home, Tyrell's fear quickly turns into a test of courage. How did a young boy like Tyrell end up in such a dangerous situation? And what happened next that led to the driver facing consequences no one could have predicted? Stay tuned to find out. If Tyrell's story of bravery and justice speaks to you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie twilight over the unfamiliar street. 8-year-old Tyrell stood alone at the bus stop, his small frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. His heart raced as he clutched his backpack tightly to his chest, eyes darting nervously from side to side. "Hello," Tyrell called out, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is anyone there?" The only response was the rustling of leaves in the cold wind that nipped at his cheeks. Tyrell shivered, pulling his thin jacket closer around him. He knew, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that this wasn't his stop. The houses looked different, the trees were taller, and there wasn't a single familiar landmark in sight. "Mom," he whimpered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. Tears began to well up in his eyes, but he blinked them back furiously. "Big boys don't cry," he told himself, even as his lower lip trembled. The street stretched out before him, a seemingly endless expanse of unfamiliar territory. Shadows lengthened, transforming ordinary objects into menacing shapes. A discarded newspaper skittered across the sidewalk, startling Tyrell and causing him to jump back with a small yelp. "It's okay," he muttered to himself, trying to summon courage. "It's just paper. Nothing to be scared of." But everything scared him right now. The quiet was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees or the distant bark of a dog. Each sound made Tyrell flinch, his imagination running wild with possibilities of what might be lurking in the shadows. He took a tentative step forward, then another. His legs felt like jelly, barely able to support his weight. The farther he walked, the more lost he felt. Every house looked the same in the fading light. Large, looming structures with dark windows that seemed to watch his every move. "I want to go home," Tyrell whispered, his voice catching in his throat. As he continued down the sidewalk, his mind began to wander, searching for an explanation of how he'd ended up in this terrifying situation. The events leading to this point played back in his memory, each detail sharp and vivid. 3 months earlier, the Johnson family's moving truck rumbled down Maple Street, its contents rattling with each bump in the road. 8-year-old Tyrell pressed his face against the car window, wide-eyed as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Neat rows of houses with manicured lawns stretched as far as he could see, a stark contrast to the bustling city neighborhood he'd called home his entire life. "Look, Tyrell," Ms. Johnson said excitedly. "That's our new house right there. The blue one with the white trim." Tyrell nodded silently, a mix of excitement and apprehension swirling in his stomach. The house was certainly bigger than their old apartment, but it felt different. As they pulled into the driveway, Tyrell noticed a group of kids playing in a nearby yard. They stopped their game to stare at the newcomers, their expressions curious and slightly wary. "Why don't you go say hello while I talk to the movers?" Ms. Johnson suggested, giving Tyrell an encouraging smile. Hesitantly, Tyrell made his way over to the group. As he approached, he could hear them whispering among themselves. "Hi," Tyrell said, trying to sound friendly. "I'm Tyrell. We just moved in." The kids exchanged glances before one of them, a freckle-faced boy, spoke up. "I'm Jake. Where'd you move from?" "The city," Tyrell replied. "About an hour from here." "Oh," Jake said, his tone slightly dismissive. "Well, we were just finishing up our game. Maybe next time." With that, the group turned and walked away, leaving Tyrell standing alone on the sidewalk. He tried to shake off the feeling of rejection as he headed back to help his mom unpack. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking, settling in, and preparing for the new school year. Ms. Johnson was busy with her new job at the local hospital, often working long hours. Tyrell spent most of his time exploring the neighborhood, always hoping to run into some kids who might want to play. But each encounter left him feeling more and more like an outsider. Finally, the first day of school arrived. Tyrell stood at the bus stop, fidgeting nervously with the straps of his new backpack. A group of kids from his street were already there, chatting animatedly about their summer adventures. Tyrell hovered on the edge of the group, trying to work up the courage to join the conversation. The screech of brakes announced the arrival of the school bus. As the doors swung open, Tyrell got his first glimpse of Mr. Nelson, the bus driver. He was a middle-aged man with thinning gray hair and a permanent scowl etched on his face. As Tyrell stepped onto the bus, Mr. Nelson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Name," he barked. "T. Tyrell Johnson," Tyrell stammered. Mr. Nelson grunted and made a mark on his clipboard. "Find a seat," he said gruffly. Tyrell made his way down the aisle, acutely aware of the curious stares from the other students. He finally found an empty seat near the back and slid in, keeping his eyes down. The first few weeks of school were challenging for Tyrell. He struggled to make friends, often eating lunch alone and spending recess on the fringes of the playground. His teacher, Mrs. Anderson, was kind but seemed overwhelmed with the large class size, leaving Tyrell to fend for himself most of the time. But it was the daily bus rides that Tyrell dreaded the most. Mr. Nelson's hostility, though subtle, was unmistakable. Each morning, as Tyrell boarded the bus, Mr. Nelson would give him a cold, dismissive glare. Sometimes, Tyrell could hear him muttering under his breath, though he could never quite make out the words. One morning, about a month into the school year, Tyrell was running a bit late. He saw the bus approaching as he reached the stop and waved frantically, hoping Mr. Nelson would wait. The bus slowed, but as Tyrell reached for the door, it suddenly accelerated, leaving him behind in a cloud of exhaust. Tyrell stood there, stunned and hurt. He had to walk the mile to school, arriving late and flustered. When he tried to explain to his teacher, she just sighed and told him to be more punctual next time. That evening, as Tyrell picked at his dinner, Ms. Johnson noticed his subdued mood. "Everything okay, sweetie?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Tyrell hesitated, then decided to open up. "Mom, I don't think Mr. Nelson likes me very much," he said quietly. Ms. Johnson frowned. "The bus driver? Why do you say that?" Tyrell explained about the glares, the muttering, and the incident that morning. As he spoke, he felt a weight lifting off his chest. But to his disappointment, Ms. Johnson didn't seem to fully grasp the gravity of the situation. "Oh, honey," she said, reaching out to pat his hand. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Mr. Nelson probably has a lot on his mind, driving all those kids around every day. And this morning was probably just an accident. I'm sure if you're on time tomorrow, everything will be fine." Tyrell nodded, not wanting to argue. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. As the weeks wore on, Mr. Nelson's behavior towards Tyrell grew increasingly hostile. He would deliberately ignore Tyrell when he raised his hand to ask a question, pretending not to see him in the rearview mirror. Other times, he would drive past Tyrell's stop, forcing the boy to shout to get his attention. The other kids on the bus began to pick up on the tension. Some, like Jake and his friends, started to target Tyrell as well, emboldened by Mr. Nelson's apparent dislike of the new student. "Hey, chocolate chip," Jake called out one morning as Tyrell boarded the bus. "Mr. Nelson almost left without you again. Maybe he's trying to tell you something." Tyrell kept his head down, fighting back tears as he made his way to his seat amidst the snickers of his classmates. He could feel Mr. Nelson's eyes on him in the mirror, but the driver said nothing to stop the teasing. Each incident chipped away at Tyrell's confidence, leaving him increasingly afraid to ride the bus. He began to have trouble sleeping, his dreams filled with images of being left behind or lost in unfamiliar neighborhoods. One evening, after a particularly rough day, Tyrell decided to try talking to his mom again. He found her in the kitchen, reviewing some patient files from work. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "can we talk about Mr. Nelson again?" Ms. Johnson looked up, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "What about him, Tyrell?" Tyrell took a deep breath and poured out everything that had been happening. The continued glares, the accidental missed stops, the way Mr. Nelson seemed to encourage the other kids teasing through his silence. As he spoke, Ms. Johnson's expression grew more concerned. When Tyrell finished, she set aside her work and pulled him into a hug. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm so sorry you've been going through this. I should have listened more carefully before." Tyrell felt a wave of relief wash over him. Finally, his mom understood. But then Ms. Johnson continued, "I still think a lot of this might be a misunderstanding or just an adjustment period. Moving to a new place is hard for everyone, and sometimes it takes a while to fit in. Why don't we give it a little more time? I'm sure things will get better once everyone gets used to each other." Tyrell's heart sank. He wanted to argue, to make her understand that this was more than just an adjustment issue. But he could see the fatigue in his mother's eyes, the stack of work waiting for her attention. He didn't want to add to her stress. "Okay, Mom," he said quietly. "We can wait a little longer." Ms. Johnson smiled and ruffled his hair. "That's my brave boy. Now how about some ice cream before bed?" As Tyrell followed his mom to the kitchen, he couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would be just like every other day, full of fear and loneliness. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Tyrell's mood perfectly. He dragged himself through his morning routine, his stomach clenching with anxiety as the time to leave for the bus approached. "Have a great day, honey," Ms. Johnson called as Tyrell headed out the door. "Remember, just be yourself, and everything will be fine." Tyrell nodded, not trusting himself to speak. If only it were that simple, he thought. At the bus stop, Tyrell kept to himself, trying to be as invisible as possible. But as the bus pulled up, he could already see Mr. Nelson's scowling face through the windshield. As Tyrell boarded, Mr. Nelson's eyes narrowed. "You're late," he growled, even though Tyrell knew he was right on time. "Sorry, sir," Tyrell mumbled, hurrying down the aisle. As the bus lurched into motion, Tyrell stared out the window, watching his neighborhood slip away. He thought about his old school, his old friends. He missed the familiarity, the sense of belonging. Here, he felt like an outsider, always on the fringes. The ride to school was tense and uncomfortable. He could hear whispers and giggles from the seats around him, and he had a sinking feeling they were talking about him. When they finally arrived at school, Tyrell waited until everyone else had gotten off before standing up. As he made his way to the front of the bus, Mr. Nelson's voice stopped him cold. "You better watch yourself today," the driver said in a low voice. "I've got my eye on you." Tyrell nodded quickly and practically ran off the bus, his heart pounding. He couldn't understand why Mr. Nelson seemed to dislike him so much. What had he done wrong? The school day passed in a blur of classes and lonely recesses. Tyrell tried to keep to himself, avoiding the stares and whispers that seemed to follow him everywhere. By the time the final bell rang, he was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As he boarded the bus for the ride home, Tyrell felt a flicker of hope. Soon, he'd be back in the safety of his house with his mom. He just had to get through this one last hurdle. But as he climbed the steps, he was met once again by Mr. Nelson's cold stare. The driver's lips curled into what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Well, Mr. Nelson said. "Look who's back." Tyrell mumbled a quiet hello and hurried to find a seat. The bus was more crowded than usual, and the only available seat was next to Jake. Tyrell hesitated, then slowly sat down, keeping as much distance between them as possible. For the first few minutes of the ride, everything seemed normal. Tyrell stared out the window, trying to ignore the chatter and laughter around him. But then, as the bus hit a pothole, Tyrell was jostled in his seat, accidentally bumping into Jake. "Watch it!" Jake snapped, shoving Tyrell hard. Tyrell, caught off guard, stumbled into the aisle. A chorus of laughter erupted from the other students. "What's going on back there?" Mr. Nelson's voice boomed from the front of the bus. Before Tyrell could explain, Jake spoke up. "Tyrell keeps pushing me, Mr. Nelson. He won't stay in his seat." Tyrell's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's not true," he protested. "It was an accident." But Mr. Nelson wasn't listening. His face reddened with anger as he glared at Tyrell in the rearview mirror. "That's it," he growled. "You're getting off at the next stop." "But that's not my stop," Tyrell cried, panic rising in his chest. "Should have thought of that before you caused trouble," Mr. Nelson replied coldly. Tyrell tried to explain, to defend himself, but his words fell on deaf ears. The other kids on the bus were either laughing or pointedly looking away, unwilling to come to his defense. As the bus slowed to a stop in an unfamiliar neighborhood, Tyrell felt as if he were in a nightmare. This couldn't be happening. But Mr. Nelson's stern voice cut through his disbelief. Off! Now! With shaking legs, Tyrell stood up. He could feel the eyes of every kid on the bus watching him as he made his way to the front. As he stepped off, he turned back, hoping to see a glimmer of sympathy or regret in Mr. Nelson's face. But the driver's expression was hard and unforgiving. Without another word, he closed the doors and pulled away, leaving Tyrell alone on the unfamiliar street. For a moment, Tyrell stood frozen, watching the bus disappear around a corner. Then the reality of his situation came crashing down on him. He was lost, alone, and scared, with no idea how to get home. Tyrell looked around frantically, hoping to see something familiar, but everything was strange and intimidating. The houses here were bigger, the lawns more expansive. There were no other kids in sight, no friendly faces to ask for help. As the sky began to darken and a chill wind picked up, Tyrell felt tears welling up in his eyes. How could Mr. Nelson do this to him? And how was he going to find his way home? With shaking hands, Tyrell opened his backpack, hoping to find something, anything, that might help him. But there was no phone, no map, nothing that could help him find his way back home. As he stood there, vulnerable and alone, Tyrell couldn't help but think about how different things were just a few months ago. Back in their old neighborhood, he had friends, he felt safe, and no one looked at him like he didn't belong. Why had they moved here? Why couldn't things go back to the way they were? But even as these thoughts swirled in his mind, Tyrell knew he couldn't just stand there forever. He had to do something. Think, Tyrell, think, he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. What would Mom do? He glanced up and down the street, hoping to see a familiar face or landmark, but everything looked alien and intimidating in the growing darkness. Should he start walking and hope to find someone who could help? Or should he stay put, like his mom always said to do when lost? Indecision paralyzed him. Every option seemed fraught with danger. What if he walked in the wrong direction and got even more lost? What if he stayed here and no one ever found him? A car drove by, its headlights momentarily blinding Tyrell. He flinched, shrinking back against a nearby tree. The vehicle didn't slow down, but the brief moment of light had shown him just how deserted the street was. He was truly alone. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Tyrell made a decision. He couldn't just stand here forever. He had to try to find his way home. With trembling legs, he began to walk. Each step felt like a monumental effort, his feet seeming to drag against the concrete. The backpack on his shoulders, usually so light, now felt like it was filled with rocks. As he walked, the neighborhood seemed to grow more ominous. Trees that had looked cheerful and inviting in the daylight now loomed over him, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Every rustle of leaves made him jump, his imagination conjuring images of monsters lurking in the shadows. A dog barked in the distance, the sound echoing in the quiet street. Tyrell's heart leapt into his throat, and he quickened his pace, nearly stumbling in his haste. It's okay, he murmured to himself, trying to summon courage. It's just a dog, nothing to be scared of. But everything scared him right now. As he continued down the unfamiliar street, his mind began to race with worst-case scenarios. What if someone bad found him? There were always stories on the news about kids getting snatched off the streets. What if that happened to him? And what if he never found his way home? What if he was doomed to wander these strange streets forever, always lost, always alone? But the thought that terrified him most was of his mother. By now, she must have realized he wasn't home. She must be going out of her mind with worry. The image of his mom, frantic and scared, searching for him, brought fresh tears to Tyrell's eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. I'm trying to get home. I really am. As he turned a corner, the unfamiliarity of his surroundings hit him anew. Nothing looked even remotely recognizable. The houses here were bigger, more imposing than in his neighborhood. The lawns were immaculate, dotted with elaborate landscaping and fancy cars in the driveways. Tyrell felt small and out of place. He was acutely aware of how he must look, a little black boy wandering alone in this fancy neighborhood. What if someone called the police on him? The thought made his stomach churn with anxiety. The fear and hopelessness that had been building finally overwhelmed him. Tyrell's legs gave out, and he sank to the curb, burying his face in his hands. The tears he'd been holding back burst forth, his small body shaking with sobs. "I want to go home," he cried, his words barely audible between gasps. "Please, I just want to go home." For several minutes, Tyrell sat there, crying out his fear and frustration. The sound of his sobs seemed to echo in the quiet street, a stark reminder of how alone he was. Finally, as his tears began to subside, Tyrell lifted his head. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket, sniffling. Crying hadn't solved anything. He was still lost, still scared. But the release of emotion had cleared his head a little. Taking a deep breath, Tyrell forced himself to stand up. He had to keep trying. His mom wouldn't give up on him, so he couldn't give up on himself. As he started walking again, Tyrell tried to focus on the positives. He was okay. He wasn't hurt. And surely someone would help him if he could just find the right person to ask. Just as this thought crossed his mind, Tyrell spotted something that made his heart leap, a flickering porch light up ahead. The warm glow seemed to beckon to him, promising safety and help. Tyrell hesitated, conflicting emotions warring within him. On one hand, he was desperate for help. Maybe whoever lived in that house could call his mom or at least tell him where he was. But on the other hand, the thought of approaching strangers, especially in this unfamiliar neighborhood, filled him with dread. What if they were mean? What if they didn't believe him and thought he was trying to cause trouble? Or worse, what if they were bad people who might try to hurt him? Tyrell stood rooted to the spot, his internal conflict reaching a peak. The porch light flickered invitingly, but the shadows around it seemed to grow darker, more menacing. Just as Tyrell was about to turn away, resigning himself to more aimless wandering, a car turned onto the street. Its headlights swept across him, and for a moment, Tyrell was afraid he'd made a terrible mistake by being so visible. But then he heard something that made his heart stop, a familiar voice calling his name. "Tyrell! Tyrell, is that you?" It couldn't be. Tyrell blinked, sure he must be imagining things. But as the car screeched to a halt and a figure burst out, he realized it was real. "Mom," he called, his voice cracking. Ms. Johnson ran towards him, her face a mixture of relief and worry. "Tyrell! Oh my God, Tyrell!" Tyrell's legs seemed to move of their own accord. He ran towards his mother, all his fear and loneliness pouring out in a fresh wave of tears. "Mom," he cried, throwing himself into her arms. Ms. Johnson scooped him up, holding him tight against her chest. Tyrell buried his face in her shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. He could feel his mother's body shaking too, and he realized she was crying as well. "It's okay, baby," Ms. Johnson murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I've got you. You're safe now. Everything's going to be all right." For several long moments, they just stood there, holding each other. Tyrell breathed in his mother's familiar scent, feeling the panic and fear that had gripped him for hours finally begin to loosen its hold. Eventually, Ms. Johnson pulled back slightly, cupping Tyrell's face in her hands. Her eyes were red from crying, but they were filled with love and concern as she looked at him. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice urgent. Did anyone try to harm you?" Tyrell shook his head. "No, Mom. I'm okay. I was so scared." Ms. Johnson pulled him close again. "I know, baby. I was scared too. When you didn't come home, I've been driving around for hours with Sarah, looking everywhere for you." It was only then that Tyrell noticed the other woman standing by the car. Sarah, his mom's friend from work, gave him a watery smile and a small wave. "Let's get you home," Ms. Johnson said, guiding Tyrell towards the car. "We can talk about everything there." As they drove home, Tyrell sat in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket Sarah had thoughtfully brought along. The relief of being found, of being safe, was overwhelming. But as the adrenaline began to wear off, the events of the day came crashing back. Tyrell's mind raced. How was he going to explain what had happened? Would his mom believe him about Mr. Nelson? And what would happen tomorrow? Would he have to get back on that bus? The thought made Tyrell's stomach churn with anxiety. He must have made a sound, because Ms. Johnson turned in her seat to look at him, her face creased with worry. Tyrell? What's wrong, sweetie? Tyrell opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How could he explain the weeks of torment, the subtle cruelty that had led to this moment? How could he make her understand when she hadn't believed him before? Seeing his struggle, Ms. Johnson reached back and took his hand. It's okay, baby. You don't have to talk about it right now if you don't want to. We're almost home. Home. The word had never sounded so sweet. As they turned onto their street, Tyrell felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was safe. He was where he belonged. But even as they pulled into the driveway, Tyrell couldn't shake the lingering fear and uncertainty. Yes, he was home now. But what about tomorrow? And the day after that? How long could he endure Mr. Nelson's cruelty before something even worse happened? As Ms. Johnson helped him out of the car, Tyrell made a decision. He had to tell her everything. No matter how hard it was, no matter if she believed him or not, he had to try. Because he couldn't face another day like this one. He couldn't live with this fear anymore. Taking a deep breath, Tyrell squeezed his mom's hand. Mom, he said, his voice small but determined. I need to tell you something. About Mr. Nelson. About why I got lost today. Ms. Johnson looked down at him, surprise and concern mingling in her expression. Of course, sweetie. Let's go inside, and you can tell me everything. As they walked into the house, Tyrell felt a mix of fear and relief. He was terrified of reliving the events of the day, of facing his mother's potential disbelief. But he was also hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, this time she would truly listen. Maybe this time, things would change. Inside, Ms. Johnson settled Tyrell on the couch, wrapping him in a warm blanket. She sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders, providing silent support and comfort. Okay, Tyrell, she said gently. I'm listening. Tell me what happened. Tyrell took a deep breath, gathering his courage. Then, haltingly at first but with growing confidence, he began to speak. He told her everything, about Mr. Nelson's cold glares and muttered comments, about the accidental misstops and the way he ignored Tyrell's raised hand. He described the teasing from the other kids, emboldened by Mr. Nelson's apparent dislike. And finally, he recounted the events of that day, the accidental bump, Jake's lie, and Mr. Nelson's cruel decision to leave him at the wrong stop. As he spoke, Tyrell could see the emotions playing across his mother's face. Shock, anger, guilt, and finally, a deep, profound sadness. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Ms. Johnson pulled him into a tight hug, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. Oh, Tyrell, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you before. This should never have happened. Never. Tyrell hugged her back, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. She believed him. She understood. After a few moments, Ms. Johnson pulled back, wiping her eyes. There was a new determination in her gaze. This ends now, she said firmly. First thing tomorrow, we're going to the school. We're going to talk to the principal, and we're going to make sure Mr. Nelson never does this to you or any other child again. Tyrell nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. What? What's going to happen to Mr. Nelson? Ms. Johnson's expression hardened. He'll face consequences for his actions, Tyrell. What he did was wrong on so many levels. But don't you worry about that. What matters is that you're safe and that this won't happen again. As the reality of the situation sank in, Tyrell felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The fear, the loneliness, the relief of being found and finally believed, it all crashed down on him at once. Seeing his fatigue, Ms. Johnson smiled softly. Why don't you get some rest, sweetie? We can talk more in the morning. Tyrell nodded, suddenly too tired to speak. As his mom helped him to his room and tucked him into bed, he felt safer than he had in months. But even as sleep began to claim him, Tyrell couldn't shake the lingering effects of his ordeal. The memory of standing alone on that unfamiliar street, the fear of never finding his way home, it all felt so vivid, so real. In the quiet of his room, with his mom's comforting presence nearby, Tyrell made a silent promise to himself. He would be brave, he would stand up for himself, and no matter what happened with Mr. Nelson or at school, he would remember that he wasn't alone. He had his mom, and she believed him. As Tyrell drifted off to sleep, the events of the day played through his mind. But alongside the fear and confusion, there was a new feeling, a spark of hope. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, things would change. And with that thought, Tyrell finally surrendered to exhaustion, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. The morning sun crept through Tyrell's bedroom window, gently rousing him from sleep. For a moment, he lay still, disoriented. Then the memories of the previous day came flooding back, and he felt a knot form in his stomach. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Ms. Johnson peeked in, her face etched with concern. "Tyrell? Are you awake, sweetie?" Tyrell nodded, sitting up in bed. His mother came in and sat beside him, pulling him into a tight hug. Tyrell could feel his mom's body shaking slightly, and he realized she was crying. He hugged her back, feeling a mix of comfort and unease at seeing his usually strong mother so upset. Ms. Johnson pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Tyrell, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. Not one bit of it. What Mr. Nelson did was wrong, and I should have believed you when you first told me something was wrong." She took a deep breath, her expression pained. "I feel like such a terrible mother. I should have protected you. I should have stopped this before it got so bad." Tyrell shook his head vigorously. "No, Mom, you're not a terrible mother. You're the best mom ever. You found me when I was lost." Ms. Johnson gave him a watery smile, cupping his face in her hands. "Oh, Tyrell, you're such a brave, kind boy. But I promise you, things are going to change. I'm going to make this right." She stood up, a determined look replacing the guilt in her eyes. "Get dressed, sweetie. We're going to the school today. We're going to file a formal complaint against Mr. Nelson and make sure this never happens again." As Tyrell got ready, he could hear his mom on the phone in the next room. Her voice was firm and insistent as she spoke to someone at the school, demanding an immediate meeting with the principal. The drive to school was tense. Tyrell's stomach churned with anxiety, but he felt a flicker of hope too. His mom believed him now. She was going to help him. As they walked into the school office, Tyrell could feel the curious stares of the staff. Ms. Johnson approached the receptionist, her voice calm, but brooking no argument. "We're here to see Principal Hawkins. It's urgent." The receptionist looked flustered. "I'm sorry, but Principal Hawkins is in a meeting dash." Then interrupted, Ms. Johnson said firmly. "This is about the safety of a student. It can't wait." After a tense moment, the receptionist nodded and picked up the phone. A few minutes later, they were ushered into Principal Hawkins' office. Principal Hawkins, a tall man with graying hair, looked up as they entered. "Ms. Johnson, Tyrell, what seems to be the problem?" Ms. Johnson sat down, her back straight and her eyes blazing. "The problem, Principal Hawkins, is that one of your employees deliberately endangered my son yesterday." She launched into the story, her voice trembling with barely suppressed anger as she recounted what Tyrell had told her. Tyrell sat quietly, his eyes downcast, occasionally nodding to confirm details. As Ms. Johnson finished, Principal Hawkins leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "Ms. Johnson, I understand you're upset, but are you sure there hasn't been some misunderstanding? Mr. Nelson has been with us for years, and we've never had any complaints dash." "No misunderstanding," Ms. Johnson cut in sharply. "My son was left alone in an unfamiliar neighborhood, miles from home. That's not a mistake. That's deliberate endangerment." Principal Hawkins held up his hands placatingly. "I hear you, Ms. Johnson, but we can't just take action based on one incident. We need to investigate, talk to Mr. Nelson, get his side of the story dash." Just then, there was a knock at the door. The receptionist poked her head in. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are some other parents here. They say it's about Mr. Nelson." Principal Hawkins looked surprised. "Send them in." 3 more parents that Ms. Johnson got in touch with last night after sending Tyrell to sleep entered the office, their faces grim. One of them, a black woman Tyrell recognized as his classmate Jamal's mom, stepped forward. "We heard what happened to Tyrell," she said, "and we're here to say it's not an isolated incident. Mr. Nelson has been targeting our children too. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. Principal Hawkins' dismissive attitude vanished, replaced by growing concern as the parents shared their stories. Tales of missed stops, of ignored raised hands, of subtle but persistent hostility, all directed at black students. By the end of the impromptu meeting, Principal Hawkins looked shaken. I had no idea," he said quietly. "Rest assured, we will launch a full investigation immediately. Mr. Nelson will be suspended pending the results." As they left the office, Ms. Johnson put her arm around Tyrell's shoulders. "You did good, baby," she said softly. "You spoke up, and now others are speaking up too. You've started something important." Over the next few days, the investigation unfolded rapidly. More parents and students came forward, emboldened by Tyrell's story. A pattern emerged, a clear, undeniable pattern of Mr. Nelson's hostility towards black students. Witnesses were interviewed, including some of Tyrell's classmates who had been on the bus that fateful day. Jake, the boy who had lied about Tyrell causing trouble, broke down under questioning and admitted the truth. "Mr. Nelson, he always seemed to have it out for Tyrell," Jake confessed, his voice shaky. I thought if I helped pick on him, Mr. Nelson would like me better. I'm sorry. I didn't know he was going to leave Tyrell at the wrong stop." As the evidence mounted, there was no room left for doubt. Mr. Nelson had intentionally endangered a child, the culmination of a long pattern of discriminatory behavior. The story spread through the town like wildfire. It was all anyone could talk about at the supermarket, at church, at Little League games. Opinions were divided. Tensions ran high. Some tried to downplay the incident. It was just a mistake, they'd say. Surely he didn't mean any real harm. But others were outraged. They demanded justice, not just for Tyrell, but for all the children Mr. Nelson had victimized over the years. Tyrell found himself at the center of a storm he hadn't anticipated. Some kids at school looked at him with newfound respect, while others avoided him entirely. Teachers treated him with careful kindness, as if he might break at any moment. Through it all, Ms. Johnson was his rock. She fielded calls from reporters, attended community meetings, and made sure Tyrell felt safe and supported at home. "You're so brave," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "I want you to know how proud I am of you. You stood up for yourself, and in doing so, you stood up for others too." Tyrell leaned against her, feeling a mix of pride and uncertainty. "What's going to happen now, Mom?" Ms. Johnson sighed. "I don't know for sure, baby, but I promise you, we're going to see this through. Mr. Nelson is going to face consequences for what he did." The sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink as Tyrell sat on the front porch, lost in thought. It had been 3 months since that fateful day when Mr. Nelson had left him stranded in an unfamiliar neighborhood. So much had changed since then, yet the memory still sent a shiver down his spine. A gentle hand on his shoulder startled him out of his reverie. "Penny for your thoughts?" Ms. Johnson asked, settling down beside him. Tyrell leaned into his mother's embrace. "Just thinking about everything that's happened, Mom. It feels like a lifetime ago, but also like yesterday." Ms. Johnson nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know, baby. It's been a whirlwind, hasn't it?" As they sat there, watching the leaves dance in the breeze, Tyrell's mind wandered back to the day they received the news about Mr. Nelson's fate. It had been a crisp Tuesday morning when Principal Hawkins called them into his office. Tyrell remembered the nervousness that had gnawed at his stomach as they walked through the school corridors. "Ms. Johnson, Tyrell, please come in." Principal Hawkins had greeted them, his face uncharacteristically somber. As they settled into their seats, Principal Hawkins cleared his throat. "I wanted to inform you personally about the outcome of our investigation into Mr. Nelson's conduct." Tyrell had held his breath, his small hand gripping his mother's tightly. After a thorough review of the evidence and testimonies from multiple students and parents, the school board has decided to terminate Mr. Nelson's employment, effective immediately. The words had hung in the air for a moment before Ms. Johnson spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "And what about the legal consequences? He endangered my child." Principal Hawkins nodded gravely. "The school district has filed a report with the police. Mr. Nelson will be facing charges for child endangerment." Relief had washed over Tyrell like a wave. Mr. Nelson wouldn't be driving any more school buses. He wouldn't be able to hurt any more kids. As if reading his thoughts, Principal Hawkins had added, "We've also implemented new training programs for all our staff, focusing on recognizing and preventing discriminatory behavior." What happened to Tyrell? It can never happen again. Back on the porch, Tyrell shifted in his seat. "Mom," he said softly, "do you think Mr. Nelson really understood what he did wrong?" Ms. Johnson sighed, running her fingers through Tyrell's hair. "I don't know, sweetie. But what's important is that he face consequences for his actions. Sometimes, that's the only way people learn." Tyrell nodded, thinking back to the day they had seen Mr. Nelson for the last time. It had been outside the courthouse, after the hearing where he had pleaded guilty to child endangerment charges. Mr. Nelson had looked different then, smaller somehow, his shoulders slumped and his face lined with defeat. As he walked down the courthouse steps, his eyes had met Tyrell's for a brief moment. In that instant, Tyrell had seen something he'd never seen before in Mr. Nelson's gaze: remorse. The former bus driver had opened his mouth as if to speak, but then thought better of it. He had simply nodded once, his eyes filled with shame, before turning away. "You know," Ms. Johnson's voice brought Tyrell back to the present, "I'm so proud of how you've handled all of this, Tyrell. You've shown incredible strength." Tyrell felt a warmth spread through his chest at his mother's words. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You fought for me." Ms. Johnson pulled him close, planting a kiss on the top of his head. "That's what mothers do, baby. We fight for our children. But you fought too. You spoke up, even when it was scary. That takes real courage." As they sat there, enjoying the peaceful evening, Tyrell thought about how much had changed in the past few months. Not just with Mr. Nelson, but in his own life too. After the incident, Ms. Johnson had become more involved in Tyrell's school life. She joined the PTA, attended every school event she could, and made a point of getting to know Tyrell's teachers and classmates. "Hey, Mom," Tyrell said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Remember when you volunteered to chaperone our class trip to the Science Museum?" Ms. Johnson laughed. "How could I forget? I never knew 8-year-olds could ask so many questions about dinosaurs." Tyrell grinned. "Yeah, but it was fun having you there. And I think the other kids like having you around too." It was true. Ms. Johnson's increased presence at school had not only made Tyrell feel safer, but it had also helped him forge new friendships. Kids who had once kept their distance, unsure of how to react to the boy at the center of the Mr. Nelson scandal, now sought him out. "Tyrell," Billy had said one day during recess, "your mom is cool. She explains stuff way better than Mr. Parker does." The memory brought a smile to Tyrell's face. Slowly but surely, he was finding his place in the school community. The fear that had once consumed him was fading, replaced by a growing sense of belonging. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard, Tyrell's thoughts turned to the future. Tomorrow would be his first day back on the school bus since the incident with Mr. Nelson. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm a little nervous about riding the bus tomorrow." Ms. Johnson squeezed his shoulder gently. "That's perfectly normal, sweetie. After what you went through, it's okay to feel nervous. But remember, things are different now. Mr. Nelson isn't driving anymore." Tyrell nodded. "I know. It's just, what if the new driver doesn't like me either?" "Oh, honey," Ms. Johnson said, turning to face him. "The new driver, Mrs. Thompson, she's wonderful. I met her last week, remember? She has kids of her own and has been driving school buses for over a decade. She understands how important it is to make every child feel safe and welcome." Tyrell remembered the meeting. Mrs. Thompson had been warm and friendly, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners when she smiled. She had knelt down to Tyrell's level, introducing herself and assuring him that her bus was a safe space for everyone. "You're right," Tyrell said, feeling some of his anxiety melt away. Mrs. Thompson seemed nice. Ms. Johnson nodded. "And don't forget, you're not alone in this. Your friends will be on the bus too. And if anything ever makes you uncomfortable, you know you can always talk to me or your teachers, right?" "Right," Tyrell agreed, feeling a surge of gratitude for his mother's unwavering support. As the evening deepened into night, Tyrell and Ms. Johnson headed inside. After dinner and a cozy bedtime story, Tyrell snuggled under his covers, his mind still buzzing with thoughts about the next day. Just as he was drifting off to sleep, he heard his bedroom door creak open. Ms. Johnson peeked in, a soft smile on her face. "Just wanted to say goodnight one more time," she whispered, "and to tell you how proud I am of you, Tyrell. You've grown so much these past few months. You're braver and stronger than you know." Tyrell felt a warm glow in his chest at his mother's words. "Thanks, Mom. I love you. I love you too, baby. Sweet dreams." As the door closed softly behind her, Tyrell closed his eyes, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement for what tomorrow would bring. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Tyrell woke up early, his stomach fluttering with a combination of anticipation and lingering anxiety. As he got dressed and packed his backpack, he could hear his mom in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. "Morning, sunshine," Ms. Johnson greeted him as he entered the kitchen. "How are you feeling?" Tyrell shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Okay, I guess." Ms. Johnson saw right through his act. She knelt down in front of him, her eyes level with his. "It's okay to be nervous, Tyrell. But remember, you're not alone, and you're stronger than you think." Tyrell nodded, drawing strength from his mother's words. They ate breakfast together, chatting about the day ahead. As they finished up, Ms. Johnson glanced at the clock. "Almost time," she said. "Ready to head to the bus stop?" Tyrell took a deep breath. "Yeah, I think so." Hand in hand, they walked to the corner where the school bus would pick Tyrell up. As they approached, Tyrell saw a group of his classmates already waiting. To his surprise, they waved and called out to him. "Hey, Tyrell," his friend Marcus shouted. "Come check out my new action figure." Tyrell looked up at his mom, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on," she said with a smile. "I'll be right here." As Tyrell joined his friends, showing genuine interest in Marcus's toy, Ms. Johnson felt a swell of pride. Her son was healing, growing stronger every day. The familiar rumble of an approaching bus made everyone look up. Tyrell felt his heart skip a beat as the yellow vehicle rounded the corner. But as it drew closer, he remembered that this wasn't Mr. Nelson's bus anymore. This was a new beginning. The bus rolled to a stop, and the doors swung open. Mrs. Thompson's friendly face appeared, her warm smile immediately putting Tyrell at ease. "Good morning, everyone," she called out cheerfully. "Ready for another great day at school?" The children began to board, chattering excitedly. Tyrell hesitated for just a moment, then turned to his mom. Ms. Johnson knelt down and gave him a quick hug. "You've got this, baby," she whispered. "Have a wonderful day." Tyrell nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Thanks, Mom. I will." With a deep breath, Tyrell turned and climbed the steps onto the bus. Mrs. Thompson greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Tyrell," she said, her kind eyes twinkling. "I'm so glad you're joining us today." Tyrell felt a weight lift off his shoulders. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," he replied, his voice steady and clear. As he made his way down the aisle, he heard his friends calling out to him. "Tyrell, over here. We saved you a seat." Sliding into the empty spot next to Marcus, Tyrell felt a sense of belonging wash over him. This was how it should be, surrounded by friends, feeling safe and welcome. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Tyrell turned to wave at his mom through the window. Ms. Johnson stood there, her hand raised in farewell, her face beaming with pride. In that moment, as the bus carried him towards school and new beginnings, Tyrell realized something important. The experience with Mr. Nelson, as terrible as it had been, had taught him valuable lessons. He had learned the power of speaking up, the importance of standing firm in the face of injustice, and the strength that comes from having a supportive community. Most of all, he had learned that he was stronger than he ever imagined. The fear that had once threatened to overwhelm him was still there, a tiny whisper in the back of his mind. But it no longer controlled him. Instead, it reminded him of how far he had come, of the challenges he had overcome. As the bus rumbled along familiar streets, filled with the chatter and laughter of his classmates, Tyrell felt a sense of peace settle over him. He was exactly where he belonged, moving forward into a future bright with possibility. The rest of the school year flew by in a whirlwind of new experiences and growth. Tyrell threw himself into his studies with renewed enthusiasm, his confidence growing with each passing day. His teachers noticed the change, praising his increased participation in class discussions and his willingness to help others. As the school year drew to a close, Tyrell found himself looking forward to the future with excitement rather than fear. The last day of school arrived, and as he boarded the bus for the final time that year, Mrs. Thompson greeted him with her usual warmth. "Have a great summer, Tyrell," she said as he climbed the steps. "You know, I'm really going to miss seeing your smiling face every morning." Tyrell grinned back at her. "Thanks, Mrs. Thompson. I'll miss you too. But I'll see you next year, right?" "You bet," she replied with a wink. "I wouldn't give up this route for anything." As Tyrell settled into his seat, he gazed out the window at the familiar streets rolling by. He thought about how different things had been at the beginning of the year, how scared and alone he had felt. Now, surrounded by friends and supported by caring adults, he felt like a different person entirely. The bus rolled to a stop at Tyrell's corner, and he stood up, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. As he made his way down the aisle, his classmates called out their goodbyes. "See you at the pool this summer, Tyrell. Don't forget about our video game marathon. Have a great vacation." Tyrell waved back, a wide smile on his face. "See you guys. Have a great summer." As he stepped off the bus, he saw his mom waiting for him, just like she had been on that first day back after the incident with Mr. Nelson. But this time, there was no fear, no hesitation. Tyrell bounded down the steps and into his mother's waiting arms. "Last day of school," he exclaimed. "We made it, Mom." Ms. Johnson laughed, ruffling his hair. "We sure did, baby. I'm so proud of you." As they walked home together, Tyrell chattering excitedly about his summer plans, Ms. Johnson marveled at the change in her son. The scared, withdrawn boy of a few months ago had blossomed into a confident, outgoing young man. He had faced his fears head-on and come out stronger for it. That evening, as they sat on the porch enjoying the warm summer twilight, Tyrell turned to his mom with a serious expression. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's on your mind, sweetie?" Ms. Johnson asked. Tyrell took a deep breath. "I want to write a letter to Mr. Nelson." Ms. Johnson's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Are you sure? You don't owe him anything, Tyrell." "I know," Tyrell replied. "But I think I need to do this. For me, to really put it all behind me." Ms. Johnson nodded slowly. "Okay, if you're sure. What do you want to say to him?" Tyrell was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I want to tell him that what he did was wrong, that it hurt me and probably other kids too. But I also want him to know that I'm okay now, that he didn't break me." Ms. Johnson felt a lump form in her throat at her son's words. "Oh, Tyrell," she said softly. "You're right. He didn't break you. If anything, you're stronger now than ever before." With his mother's support, Tyrell composed his letter over the next few days. When it was finished, they mailed it together, Tyrell feeling a sense of closure as he watched the envelope disappear into the mailbox. As the summer progressed, Tyrell threw himself into new adventures. He joined a local youth group, made new friends at the community pool, and even started volunteering at the animal shelter with his mom on weekends. Each new experience helped build his confidence and expand his worldview. As August rolled around and the new school year approached, Tyrell found himself looking forward to returning to school with an excitement he'd never felt before. The day before classes started, he received an unexpected letter in the mail. "It's from Mr. Nelson," Ms. Johnson said softly, handing Tyrell the envelope. Tyrell's hands shook slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting. "Dear Tyrell," the letter began, "I received your letter, and I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for what I did to you. Your words made me realize the full impact of my actions, not just on you, but on all the children I was responsible for over the years. I've had a lot of time to think about my behavior, and I'm ashamed of the person I was. I want you to know that I'm getting help to address my prejudices and become a better person. Your courage in speaking up has set me on a path to change. You're right. What I did was wrong, and there's no excuse for it. I'm glad to hear that you're doing well now. You're a strong, brave young man, Tyrell, and I hope you never lose that strength. I know I can never undo the harm I caused, but I want you to know that your letter has made a profound impact on me. Thank you for having the courage to reach out. I wish you all the best in your future. Sincerely, Robert Nelson. Tyrell read the letter twice, his emotions a mix of surprise, relief, and a strange sense of peace. He handed it to his mom, watching her face as she read it. "How do you feel about this?" Ms. Johnson asked gently after she finished reading. Tyrell thought for a moment. "I feel good, I think. Like maybe something good came out of all of this after all." The next morning, as Tyrell prepared for his first day back at school, there was a spring in his step. He was excited to see his friends and looking forward to all the new experiences the year would bring. As they walked to the bus stop, Ms. Johnson squeezed Tyrell's hand. "You ready for this, baby?" Tyrell nodded, a confident smile on his face. "I'm ready, Mom. More than ready." When the bus pulled up, Mrs. Thompson opened the door with a cheery greeting. "Welcome back, everyone. Who's excited for a new school year?" Tyrell bounded up the steps, high-fiving Mrs. Thompson as he passed. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. It's great to be back." As he made his way down the aisle, friends called out greetings and waved him over to empty seats. Tyrell settled in next to his best friend, Marcus, feeling a sense of belonging that he'd once thought impossible. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Tyrell turned to wave at his mom through the window. Ms. Johnson stood there, her eyes shone with pride and joy rather than worry. Tyrell faced forward, ready for whatever the new school year might bring. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew he had the strength to face them. The experience with Mr. Nelson, as difficult as it had been, had taught him valuable lessons about standing up for himself, the importance of speaking out against injustice, and the power of resilience. The bus came to a stop in front of the school, and Tyrell stood up, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. As he stepped off the bus, he took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The school year stretched out before him, full of promise and potential. "Have a great first day, Tyrell," Mrs. Thompson called out as he descended the steps. Tyrell turned back with a wide grin. "Thanks, Mrs. Thompson. I think it's going to be a really good year." And as he walked through the school gates, surrounded by friends and filled with a sense of purpose, Tyrell knew in his heart that he was right. It was going to be a good year indeed, not just for him, but for all the other kids he hoped to help along the way. The story of the little boy left at the wrong bus stop had come full circle. What had begun as a tale of fear and injustice had transformed into one of resilience, growth, and hope. Tyrell had not only survived his ordeal, he had thrived, turning his experience into a force for positive change. As he sat down in his classroom, ready to begin a new chapter in his life, Tyrell felt a sense of peace wash over him. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was his to shape, and he was ready for whatever it might bring. Tyrell's story is a powerful reminder that bravery can come in the smallest moments, even when fear seems overwhelming. His actions didn't just protect himself. They sent a message that no one should ever be left behind or mistreated. If Tyrell's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Tyrell's shoes?